Okay, welcome back to another episode. No cocktail today, just criticisms. But if you do want a cocktail to kind of end the summer with, I suggest the John Daly, or you can call it the Drunken Arnold Palmer. I like to mix the rum with the tea and the lemonade with the tequila. Now you can do it that way, or you can just get a glass and do rum, tequila. I do a couple ounces of each, and then you do half lemonade and half iced tea. So if you're wanting to sip along as we go over these, go ahead. And we're going to be talking about 1991, the stack, the classic stack from 91. Starting on August the 12th. I believe that was when Nevermind came out. But for 44 days after the middle of August, you had all of these records released. And I believe 91 is in a lot of people's best year of music ever list. And I'm gonna have one by the end of the year myself of which ones I think, but this is a great like month and a half chunk of time where these albums are released. I, however, don't think any of these are the best records released in 1991. I have one in particular that I think trumps all of these as the best album released in 1991, and then I also have a couple I think that were better than these even. Still not the best, but better than these. And then one, not on this stack, that is my favorite. That is not what I consider the best album in the year. However, there is also a rap album, I believe. I almost want to say, is it Bone Thugs and Harmony, or is it? I don't know. There's a really great rap record too that's released in this like chunk of time. It might, I don't know. It either will come to me, it won't come to me, or I'll do a separate video on it. I just did never own the record. But the first one I'm going to talk about is Metallica, the Black Album, or the self-titled album. I think this is their most well-produced record. If you look at the ones that came before versus this one is obviously the most produced. I think it's the most slick or sleek, which is why I think it was the most popular. This album, I think, to me, indicated the departure of what metal represented. This is bringing metal into the mainstream, this record. And I don't think that metal as a genre has actually recovered. There's some great underground metal acts. Metal in and of itself had this kind of attitude. This was a great metal record, but it was just so big and bombastic. It just didn't feel like it did not. It felt like Metallica as a glorified arena band, kind of, to me. Granted, the songs on this album are great, well written. I love the record itself. It was, at the time, the only Metallica album I owned, other than And Justice for All. I had Injustice for All, and I had this one. I did not own any of their earlier albums. Just to give you an indicator of where I was 15 in 1991, and I really had, at that point, I was probably more of what you would call a listener of alternative or underground or indie music, new wave. But if it was like an exceedingly popular album, I probably had it. And I felt like the songs on that album were quality enough for me to want to buy their record. Not their best work, though. I happen to be a master of puppet, ride the lightning guy. I think those are my two favorite. Next is Nevermind by Nirvana. Second album. I owned the cassette single "Smells Like Teen Spirit" before this album was released. So I had known who Nirvana was earlier. I had heard Bleach, didn't own it. But I had friends who had it. We listened to it. I listened to Nirvana prior to Nevermind coming out. Not my favorite Nirvana album. I think it's overrated in their catalog. My favorite one is In Utero. I just simply think that In Utero gives us more of a vision of where Kurt Cobain was going to go as a songwriter. There was a lot of excitement. I think that we missed out on a lot of great music. I think Kurt Cobain was just getting started, and I think Nevermind was just really a jumping off point for giving him a little bit of the creative freedom that he was going to need moving on. In Utero is, to me, a far superior album. My favorite album of theirs, though, is the Unplugged. But my favorite song by Nirvana is Something in the Way, and that's on this album. And I probably bought this. I did not buy this in the summer. I probably got this somewhere in like November or so. Next, again, this is not chronological. This is not like the order in which they were released. This is just the order in which these were stacked by me. Pearl Jam's 10. I was a bigger fan of Pearl Jam than I was of any of the other Seattle. I won't say I was a bigger fan than other Seattle, but probably my least favorite Seattle band was Nirvana. I liked them all. Pearl Jam was my least. Pearl Jam was up there. Nirvana was kind of down there. I thought Pearl Jam sounded more like 70s rock, and I kind of liked that. One of the things when I was 15 that I was kind of, even though I was a huge fan of bands like The Cure and Depeche Mode and Susie and the Banshees and the Smiths and Joy Division and things like that, I was also really getting interested in 60s and 70s rock. So I was really kind of getting into like the Doors, and I was getting into the Moody Blues and Pink Floyd and Led Zeppelin and the Velvet Underground and Iggy Pop and David Bowie, but then also like that Terry Kath, Chicago. I was getting into a lot of Supertramp. So I was into real classic rock. And to me, this just sounded like rock to me. And I liked it. Kind of, it was an updated version of rock. Kind of on the same thing, the same trend of Seattle bands. This one also is one of the ones that came out. It's Bad Motorfinger by Soundgarden. This is my favorite Soundgarden album. Even though Super Unknown was, I think, probably a better selling record than this one. I like this one a lot. I thought Soundgarden was kind of a more metal band, a harder rock band. I liked their sound. I really liked Chris Cornell's voice is what I liked, but I liked the sound of Soundgarden. I think out of all of the records that are released in this chunk, that one is my favorite, and I think it's the best one out of the bunch. I mean, I think this is probably the best. Next on the list is the double Use Your Illusion 1 and Use Your Illusion 2 by Guns N' Roses. I can tell you that chronologically, I bought this album last. Out of the ones that were released in 1991 in this chunk of time, I probably did not get these until somewhere the next summer. I waited a while to get them. And I did not buy them at the same time. I think I bought this one first, and then I bought this one second. And I did not buy them like one right after the other. I think I bought this one like in maybe June, and I think I bought this one like in early August of 92, these two. So these were the last two of this run from 91 that I bought. I think this could have been one album. I think that this was filler, really. To me, this was, had they just done one Use Your Illusion album and had the best tracks from both of them on one record, it's highly likely this would have been the best album of 1991, in my opinion, had they done that. But they made it a double album, two different albums where you had to buy them separately. I felt like some of the songs were not so great. That's just my opinion, obviously. Of course, you know, arguably they have one of the greatest debut albums of any band. So it's going to be hard, in my opinion, to like hit that mark. They were kind of up against the wall anyway of expectation. So there was no way they were going to repeat Appetite for Destruction. But I would definitely say that this one is a miss for the most part. But like I said, there are some great songs on the record. The first one, you've got, you got the radio ones that everyone knew, like Live and Let Die and Don't Cry and November Rain. But there's some, you know, like You Ain't the First, I think on this one was one of I think is a good one. And then on this one, you know, you still have the Civil War is a good one. And so yeah, there's just so many songs on here that could have maybe been left off, or just used as like B-sides to singles. And then finally, last but not least, is this one. This one was, I probably did get this one really close to the release date. If I remember correctly, I think out of all of these ones that were released in this 44-day, this is the one I bought first. And this is the one I think that was my, after Metallica, this was the one I played the most. This one was the one that got stolen the most. I can tell you, I've had 3 different copies of it on cassette and 2 different copies on CD. So to me, this is the obviously well produced, the culmination of everything that the Red Hot Chili Peppers were. My biggest beef with this record is that, to me, the Red Hot Chili Peppers were one of the quintessential underground bands of the 80s. Like, you really had to be into like that subculture to really appreciate them. The thing that made me the most angry was to see like everybody wearing Red Hot Chili Peppers t-shirts after Under the Bridge was released. That was a little disheartening, I guess, in a sense. Not that I was trying to gatekeep or anything, but I was like, oh, come on. You were just listening to Debbie Gibson like 6 months ago. Now you got this on? Nah, it ain't flying with me. You're at the New Kids concert. I know that. All right, so anyway, I do love the little California trilogy that they had after Frusciante came back to the band, Californication and By the Way and Stadium Arcadium. I think those 3 records are great records. Again, Stadium Arcadium kind of, I thought, had a little filler on it. I think it could have been boiled down to one record, but if you were to pair, I mean, unfortunately, this doesn't, if you took this one and paired it with those other ones, that's a 4 record chunk. That's really outstanding. Um, at the time, I will tell you this, at the time that this was released, I liked Mother's Milk better than Blood Sugar Sex Magic. Just simply because so many people had this album. And 90% of the time when you ask, if you saw this in somebody's tape deck or somebody's CD collection, they had this and then they had What Hits, or they just had that. So I would automatically say my favorite of theirs was Mother's Milk, just because I wanted to be different and a dickhead. So anyway, okay, so what are some other albums from 1991 that I think are better than these and deserve, like, if you've not listened to them, and then which one is my favorite? So I'm going to kind of go in order. Here's one that I think was better than those, and this is the Pixies. Trompe le Monde. Trompe le Monde. But I love the Pixies even before all of these. And that's kind of where I felt like Nirvana was aping the Pixies in their sound in a lot of respects. But I love this album. And I played this album far, far more than I played any of the ones in that stack. This one was a quintessential necessity in my tape deck rotation. Better still, I think, is REM's Out of Time. Probably in the running of the best album of 1991, in my opinion. This has some bangers on it. If you have not listened to this in a long time, or if you've never listened to this, I highly, highly recommend you giving this one a listen. It is probably their best album. But it is a fantastic record. It's everything that REM was before, but just with giving them the money for them to go into the studio and do everything they wanted. I think it's a head and shoulders above any of the ones that we started with. My vote for best album of 1991 is Loveless. I mean, there is no more classic album from that year. This is just, I mean, I don't want to say the word perfection, but it comes so close to being just a sublime record that I can't tell you how many times I just would come home from school in the afternoon and just crank that one. It's just magnificent. It is a magnificent album. Okay, so my favorite album of 1991, not the best, not even close. It's probably not this artist's. It's probably his worst, or down there, near the bottom of his efforts as a solo artist. However, this was the point where I had probably become the most steadfast fan of this performer's, is when the singles and this album, because I had the can you remember I mean, I didn't have a record player anymore. I stopped having a record player sometime in the 80s. So the 12-inch singles, you could buy them as cassette maxi singles, and I bought all of the cassette maxi singles, and it is Morrissey's Kill Uncle. I was a Morrissey fanatic. This album was kind of the thing that put me over the top, partly because I just really started listening to the Smiths and Morrissey somewhere in the neighborhood of 1990. I hadn't really been a fan up until that point. I mean, I liked Depeche Mode, Erasure, like I said, New Order, Joy Division, The Cure, and I never really listened. I mean, the only Smiths song I had heard up to that point of 1990 was How Soon Is Now, and the only Morrissey song I had heard up that night by 1990 was Every Day Is Like Sunday. So, but this one came out, and I bought it pretty close to the day of release, and I can't tell you why. I just became obsessed. That's my favorite album of 1991, and so I think that's, to me, gonna always be better than any of those. I have a whole thing I can do about Morrissey. I was also listening to a lot of industrial music too, so Ministry and Nitzareb and Front 242 and you know, the Jesus and Mary chain. I don't know if you would consider the Jesus and Mary chain really industrial, but My Life with a Thrill Kill Cult and things like that. So that stuff that was being released in 90, 91, 92, I was probably listening to more than I was this stack. But I think that, you know, if you want to say, well, which year was the best year for popular music, you got to give 1991 consideration for the top spot, because if nothing else, even if you didn't like most of these albums, you have to say they're really influential, and they're key parts of pop culture and the zeitgeist of the 90s. I mean, all of these albums had some kind of purpose, meaning, and it mattered. They mattered, and they lingered. Like, you know, people in 1995 and 96 were still playing these records. They're still spinning the albums at that time. It wasn't like album that was released and then they moved on to the next thing. You know, these had staying power. They were almost instant classics. And so, to me, if you're going to say, well, what, and then with the exception of the Morrissey record, these, especially the middle two, these two in the middle, there are probably no two better, like, alternative rock albums or indie rock albums than those two, even though they're main record label releases. So anyway, I'll see you next time on Cocktails and Criticism. And if you have a comment, or if you want to add to the conversation, go ahead and tell me your opinion. Did you like any of those albums? Did you buy them? Are you a fan now? Were you never a fan? You don't have to be a fan of them. You could think that they sucked. I don't know. Whatever. But I'll see you next time.